Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to cover one of the most important aspects of software engineering, and that is writing a great pull request. Writing a pull request isn't just about getting your code merged, it's actually a reflection of how you think, communicate, and collaborate. Great PRs build trust, speed up reviews, and it's actually a great way to stand out amongst all the other engineers that you're working with. If you're new to this channel, my name is Johnny. I'm a staff software engineer at Meta. I've written thousands of pull requests in the past 10 years of being a software engineer. So in this video, I'll go over my exact tips and best practices to help you write that amazing pull request. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to share some hidden ways that your pull request can be used in various aspects, or you may not even know that that's how it's being used. So stick around to the end to see how your pull request can affect your overall performance and your promotions. Without further ado, let's dive in. First section we're going to talk about is the structure of your PR and kind of the scope of your PR. Tip number one is keep the PR focused on one main purpose. You really don't want to try to tackle the entire feature or entire project in a single pull request. It just gets really difficult to review if you are doing a bunch of different things, and it gets very hard for the reader or the reviewer to know exactly what code is changing what piece of logic. So keep your PR focused and to one main point. Tip number two is don't mix refactoring with changing new logic. Now this may sound a little unintuitive because a lot of times if you need to make changes to your code's logic, you need to refactor certain things. If you're going to do a refactor and then add new logic, split those PRs into two separate PRs. You can have one dedicated for refactoring and then another to add a new logic. This also adds like a really good benefit of being able to test your refactors on its own, maybe write some unit tests to go along with your refactor and make sure that that refactor itself work as intended. And then in the next PR, you can follow up with new logic. The separation of concerns in your PR will make you that much of a better engineer, and people will really appreciate your systematic approach to making changes to your code. Tip number three here is to clean up only what's directly related to your PR. Now, there is a common saying that when you're working on code, you want to leave the code cleaner than how you found it. Now, I'm totally 100% aligned with this, but the key point here that I'm trying to say is that if you want to clean something up that you found while writing new code, do that in a separate PR. You really don't want to add really unnecessary changes that is going to confuse the reviewers of your core main change that you're trying to make. Tip number four here is to avoid unnecessary renames of functions and variables and etc. Everyone has a unique way of coding. Everyone has certain naming structures that they feel is more easier to understand. But making those changes just add confusion to that single purpose PR that I'm talking about. And you can always follow up with another PR to make very specific and targeted changes for renames. Tip number five here is to comment your code where it makes sense. Now, there's a lot of school of thoughts on commenting, where to comment, what to comment. That may actually be another video on its own, but what I usually like to do is for every new class or util funcs or whatever, at least that file, I add a high-level comment. And then I try to leverage the code as much as possible to self-document and explain the code as much as possible. But I would say that if you run into some like very unique or edge case or unexpected logic, that's when you essentially need a comment to explain that logic. And another side tip that I like to do is for certain languages, if I'm passing variables, like if I only have the value that I'm passing, I like to comment what the name of that parameter is in the function signature that is expecting it. One high-level good coding practice here is that code is actually read a lot more than is actually written. So you should highly optimize for the reader of the code rather than just writing the code. Now, the final tip in this theme of structure and scope is keep PR small. Aim for about under 400 lines of code. Anything that is more than that, it just gets extremely difficult to review. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that there are definitely times when you can't just follow this rule to the T. You know, certain function changes or whatever, if it's in a large code base, just renaming the functions may be multiple thousands of lines. I mean, who knows, right? If you can keep it small, you remember the goal of a good pull request is to make sure that the reader can fully understand the code that you're changing and how it's affecting the current code base so that it can be merged safely and quickly. Now, before we get to the next main theme, I want to quickly share how I write my own pull requests, like my workflow and how I'm able to kind of incorporate the tips that I just shared very easily. Now, when I work on a new project or a new feature, I actually end up writing that piece of code maybe a few times. Now, what I mean by this is when I first start out, my first draft is basically a chicken scratch of getting a prototype working of the feature that I want as quickly as possible. What I'm trying to get out of here is to map out the various different pieces of the architecture. So in this stage, I may actually rewrite the feature, a few more times in like slightly different ways, depending on what I find out and learn while I'm writing the code. So once I get that down, I have like a very good idea of how I want to approach it. At this step, maybe it might even require like a design doc. I could take that and review it with my peers so that they're kind of all aligned, especially if the change is major or kind of non-trivial, then that's what I would do. But after I do that, then I will like execute the entire feature again, like the whole thing. And then after I finish writing the feature, I will then take time to split the diff into this exact structure and scope tips that I just gave, making sure each diff or PR, at Meta we call them diffs. So throughout this video, you may hear me say diffs. I'll take that feature and I'll split it up and I will follow this exact code structure and scope so that every single one of my PRs is atomic in nature. So yeah, that's kind of my strategy. It does take a long time, right? Because you're doing multiple iterations, but your code quality and your PRs get so much better if you follow this step. Like you will quickly stand out amongst your leads and your other engineers who are reviewing your PRs. All right, let's move on to the next major theme, which is packaging your pull requests. If you're one of those engineers that doesn't spend a lot of time in the summary or the description or the commit title and like a good test plan, then you're definitely doing things incorrectly. If you spend a bunch of time working on a high quality code and you really don't want to waste that effort with suboptimal packaging. Now this packaging has a lot to do with like the thing that I'm going to share at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around. It really makes a big deal at the end of the day, so pay attention to this particular section. First, you need to think about a good title, and this will be very easy if you follow my previous tips where each PR is, has one main focus. Now, this is actually a good litmus test to see if you follow that rule, because if your title is multiple things, then chances are you need to split up that PR. The next is to write a clear PR summary. What did you add? What did you delete? What did you change? Link good design docs or product specs or tickets, any kind of extra context that will help you add to this artifact. Also, try to use plain language here, skip the jargon or filler words. You want to be very concise. Remember, the biggest thing about pull requests that I always harp on is that you're writing this for someone to read. You got to optimize for the reader. Now, also in the summary, you want to double down on any kind of trickery or non-obvious logic. I mentioned in the tip previously about adding comments to non-obvious, behaviors, but this is a great place to also call it out so that the code reviewer can really dig in and kind of double check that non-obvious logic. So yeah, so like highlighting edge cases you've handled and also being clear and intentional about what you haven't included or fixed yet. For example, you could add like a to-do or a note saying, I will handle this next part in a different diff or PR. So that's for the summary and the title. Don't skip out on this step. I think it's one of the most important things about being a good engineer. Kind of the stack of work that you're doing is fully covered in a good summary. You really want to make sure that you have a rock solid summary for basically every single PR that you land. Now, this next section is about testing and validation. Of course, you want to test your code manually and with like unit tests if you can, or any kind of other tests like end-to-end tests or performance tests. Testing in itself is a whole nother topic. I think there's actually a lot of school of thoughts on how much testing is enough and what kind of testing is like the best. But that's another video. But for this, in my opinion, these are the minimum things that you absolutely need for every PR. And number one is to have a really good test plan with clear before and afters. Especially for UI changes, you want to add a screenshot or a video how your code has changed. One of my biggest pet peeves is not seeing like a screenshot change when there's clear UI changes that happen. The test plan just says it works. Like that's like the absolute worst. Next tip is if it's a new feature and like it's not common knowledge of how to test this feature, you probably want to include like a testing instruction. Could be just quick like steps like 1, 2, 3, 4, do this and that. Or you can even make like a dog fooding doc, which is ideal in my opinion. Again, the goal is to get the reviewer very quickly acclimated to your code and your feature so that they can quickly review it. Now the next tip is around CI/CD processes. If you don't have good CI/CD, like maybe even a pre-hook or some kind of automated job that does static testing, launch blocking tests, all these kind of things, if that's not like set up in your organization, you actually should be the one to try to build that out and land it, because that's actually a huge time save and a lever for your team to move faster in the long run. Now CI/CD pipelines usually run when you push code and it's like ready to be merged, and sometimes it takes time. So this is kind of a pet peeve, but just wait for all of that to pass and it's good to go before you send it off to review. Now the final tip here is to actually manually test everything after you make like a new change. Let's say that someone asks you to make a change and you make the change, and I've seen countless times where engineers kind of just skip revalidating the work because it takes time to test everything. But always double check after you fix something or address the feedback to make sure that everything is working as intended. So yeah, so that's kind of the packaging of a good pull request. If you follow all these steps and all these tips, I guarantee your pull requests are gonna look amazing, like really fantastic. All right, so I hope you guys got all of this and you're gonna start writing great pull requests. And now I wanna kind of share some juicy secrets about how your pull request might be being used without you even knowing it. Now, when you're just starting out, you might think that pull requests are just being used to land code. The reality is that your pull requests will come up time and time again in very different forms. For example, in a SEV review, let's say that there's some major incident that happens, and due to some bisecting or people looking at the history of the commit messages, they find out that it's your PR that caused it. Now, SEVs are usually blameless cultures in most companies, but if that PR is very subpar and not very optimized, not packaged in a way that feels very professional, and it just doesn't give off the vibes that you cared about the code. Now, a common example here would be having a very crappy summary or test plan. I've seen cases where those kind of diffs that happen in SEVs, like that could be a point of contention when it comes to like talking about your overall quality as an engineer or your technical aptitude. It doesn't seem like much, but during mashups and these kind of like PSC cycle reviews, small things like this can make a major difference. Now, speaking of performance reviews, your pull requests and like your quality of pull requests, they can definitely come up. If you're trying to get promoted from like a junior to a mid-level, just writing really good PRs can be good enough for you to get to the next level. It's that dramatic of a thing for certain levels and certain aspects. And you'd be surprised how much of all of these like random PR metrics that people actually care about. But again, they're not like rule of thumbs, but they keep coming up time and time again in different aspects of your performance. So the rule of thumb here is think of every pull request that you land as an artifact of your work that can be shown at any moment in time without your consent. It's kind of a weird structure, but it's just the reality of every company I've ever worked in, not just FANG. It doesn't matter what company it is. Code reviews, especially early on in your career, is going to be the single most important factor to kind of represent your work. Take writing good PRs seriously, and then you will be rewarded handsomely in the future. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Now, if you enjoy this kind of content on like general tips of being a good software engineer, I made a video around 40 lessons of 10 years of software engineering. You can check it out here. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and until I see you guys next time,